That Manhattan nanny who stabbed 2 children in her care has been indicted. 50-year-old Yoselin Ortega has been indicted now with first-degree murder. She is charged with killing 6-year-old Lucia Crim and her 2-year-old brother Leo in their Manhattan apartment back on October 25th.
They came to the Upper West Side today and stared, silently, hopelessly trying to make some sense of all the horror and pain here. But how in the world do you make sense out of this?
I'm very sorry for everything that happened.
Today's case takes us to the Upper West Side of Manhattan, New York, a neighborhood that never shouts and never tries to steal the spotlight. It speaks softly, confidently, like someone who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. In the morning, the air is filled with the smell of freshly ground coffee drifting out of small cafes, mixed with the cool shade cast by the buildings. During the day, people walk the sidewalks at an easy pace, books tucked under their arms, lost in their own thoughts. And in the evening, the park slowly sinks into that warm, golden light as the sun sets over the Hudson River, creating this almost perfect illusion of total safety and calm. Between the dense green stretch of Central Park and the quiet paths near Riverside Park, the neighborhood moves at a steady, predictable rhythm. No rush, but with a real sense of dignity. You know, it's easy to imagine the same residents following the same routes for years, greeting their neighbors, recognizing familiar faces, and never really hurrying anywhere, because everything that matters is already close by. This is a place where trust feels natural and anxiety feels distant, almost impossible. All of this unfolded inside a 10-story residential building on West 75th Street, just 1 block away from Central Park. On October 25th, 2012, a woman named Charlotte was riding the elevator in that building with 2 children who lived there and their nanny. It was a short ride, completely unremarkable, one of thousands like it that happened there every single day. I said to the little girl, "You know how beautiful you are?" Charlotte later recalled. She smiled at me with the most sincere smile I've ever seen and said, "Thank you." At that moment, nothing felt strange or unsettling. Not the nanny's expression, not the children's behavior, nothing raised even the slightest red flag. Everything looked normal, almost routine, exactly how it should look in such a calm place. Less than an hour later, around 5:30 p.m., Charlotte found herself in the elevator again. That's when she heard what she later described as a raw, animal-like scream coming from somewhere inside the building. The sound was so sharp, so completely out of place, that it couldn't be confused with anything else. It was pure terror, she said. I'd never heard anything like it before. When she stepped out of the elevator, her voice echoed through the building, bouncing off the walls. Other residents heard it too, and with this growing sense of dread, they began stepping out of their apartments, trying to understand what was happening. Meanwhile, Marina Crim had taken her 3-year-old daughter, Nessie, to a swimming class. It was supposed to be just another normal part of the day, like one of those routine errands before everyone heads back home. Her other children, 6-year-old Lucia Crim, affectionately called Lulu, and 2-year-old Leo Crim, stayed at home with their nanny, 50-year-old Yoselin Ortega. Marina had planned to meet up with the nanny later that same day, and honestly, nothing suggested that anything was wrong. But as time passed, there were no messages from the nanny, no calls, and the children weren't heard from either. You know, it was that slow, creeping silence, the kind that doesn't make sense at first, but suddenly starts to feel very, very heavy. With every passing minute, Marina Crim grew more anxious about their absence. Her phone stayed completely silent. Her text messages went unanswered, and that only made the dread settle in deeper. You know that feeling when the quiet starts to feel loud? Yeah, it was like that. "Where are you? Where is Lulu?" she kept texting, trying to reach anyone at all. Eventually, she headed back home with Nessie, deciding she needed to see for herself if everything was okay. The moment Marina stepped into the apartment and opened the door, she felt it. Something was wrong. The place was unnaturally quiet, and every light was off, like the apartment itself was holding its breath. As fear began to creep in, she went back downstairs and asked the doorman if they had gone out earlier. He said no, and right then, it became clear. Something had gone terribly wrong, and the sense of calm that defined the Upper West Side was about to be shattered. Marina went back upstairs and began searching for the kids. Her movements were fast but unsure, like panic was already there, even if she wasn't ready to name it yet. She immediately noticed her daughter's bag and her son's stroller, right where they always were. That should have been reassuring, but instead, it made everything worse. Holding Nessie's hand, Marina moved slowly from room to room, scanning the familiar space that suddenly felt cold and chuggy, like it no longer belonged to her. As she approached the bathroom, her eyes caught a thin strip of light shining from beneath the closed door. It was such a small thing, but it made her heart start racing. Inside the bathroom, she saw the bodies of Leo and Lucia. Lucia had been stabbed 30 times. Leo, 5 times. This was a moment the mind simply cannot process. A space that had so recently been filled with children's laughter had turned into a scene of brutal violence. Yoseli and Ortega was there too. They locked eyes for a brief second, silent, wordless. There were no explanations in that look. Then Yoseli grabbed a large knife and began stabbing herself. Fast, frantic, chaotic, like she was trying to escape a reality that could no longer be undone. A neighbor, Rema Star, who lived on the same floor as the Crim family, heard the screams. They tore through the silence of the building, sharp and out of control, pulling people out of their apartments. There was this terrifying screaming, she later said. Someone was yelling that her throat had been cut. It was horrific. The doorman, Glenn Ludi, immediately called 911. On the line, there were screams in the background, fragments of voices, total chaos. Police rushed to the building. When officers entered the lobby, they were met with raw human grief. Marina was screaming and crying, clutching Nessie tightly against her chest, like holding her as if she could shield her from the entire world. One neighbor described Marina as completely inconsolable. She was hysterical, shattered, totally disoriented, overwhelmed by a panic that no one could calm. What first responders found inside the apartment was beyond even the worst nightmare. The bathroom floor and walls were covered in blood. The air was heavy, still, almost suffocating. 2 blood-soaked knives were recovered, one in the hallway, another in the bathroom sink. Everything pointed to absolute chaos and extreme violence inside that confined space. While emergency crews continued filling the building, Marina's husband, Kevin Crim, was on his way home from a business trip. He was a senior vice president at CNBC Digital and was traveling back from John F. Kennedy International Airport, completely unaware of what had happened. When he arrived, plainclothes officers were waiting for him. Kevin listened to a voicemail Marina had left. All he heard were screams filled with terror and despair. After that, he was told the truth. That moment became the line that split life into before and after. And once you cross it, there is no way back. Before we get into the main part of this video, let's take a moment and remember Lucia Crim and Leo Crim. Just pause for a second, hold that thought with us, and please leave the hashtag number forever with us in the comments. 37-year-old Kevin Crim and his 36-year-old wife, Marina Crim, were raising 3 children, and from the outside, they looked like exactly the kind of family you'd picture as happy and well put together. They were originally from California, but over time, they made the decision to change their lives, moving from San Francisco to New York. For them, this move wasn't just about geography. It was a new chapter, like a real attempt to build a stable, organized future for their kids in a big city. Marina worked as a preschool teacher, after earning a bachelor's degree in fine arts and later a master's degree in education. She truly understood how children think, what they need, how they feel, all of it. After her own children were born, Marina stepped away from her career and chose to dedicate herself fully to her family, to the everyday routines, and the responsibility of raising her kids. For her, this wasn't a sacrifice. It was a conscious choice, rooted in the desire to be present for every moment of their growth, not missing a thing. As time went on and the demands of daily life became heavier, the couple decided to hire a nanny to help out. That's how 50-year-old Yoselin Ortega became part of their household. She had been working with the family for about 2 years, and during that time, became part of their everyday routine, someone they trusted with the most precious thing they had, their children. There were no warning signs, nothing suggested danger or any kind of threat. After the tragedy, Yoselin was arrested immediately. She was carried out of the building on a stretcher, surrounded by police and emergency responders. She was in critical condition due to self-inflicted injuries, and was transported to New York Presbyterian Hospital for emergency treatment. A building that had so recently been filled with the normal rhythm of family life suddenly became a place of silent shock, another reminder of just how fragile the sense of safety can really be.
In other news, tonight there is a growing memorial outside an Upper West Side apartment building where a nanny is accused of killing 2 children.
As news of the tragedy began to spread, people were in complete shock. Before long, flowers and candles started appearing outside the building, quietly lining the sidewalk like, a wordless response to something no one could fully process. Police escorted Marina, Crim and Nessie out of the building, covering them with a white sheet to shield them from photographers. Marina was taken to the hospital to be treated for severe psychological trauma. Leo Crim and Lucia Crim were transported to St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital Center, but sadly, both children were officially pronounced dead. At that point, the investigation was formally classified as a double homicide, and the question hanging in the air was impossible to ignore. What actually happened here, and why?
They came to the Upper West Side today and stared, silently, hopelessly trying to make some sense of all the horror and pain here. But how in the world do you make sense out of this?
The children's nanny, Jocelyn Ortega, whom the kids affectionately called Josie, wasn't seen by the family as just an employee. She was treated almost like a full-fledged member of the family. She spent a huge part of each day with the children, knew their routines, their fears, their little joys. Her presence became so familiar, so normal, that over time it blended into the background of family life, something that just felt natural, something no one questioned. Jocelyn was born in Santiago de los Caballeros in the Dominican Republic. Later, she moved to the United States, where she managed to build a life for herself and eventually became a naturalized citizen. In Manhattan, she lived with her sister and her own son, trying to balance work and motherhood at the same time. It was her sister who played a key role in connecting Jocelyn with the Crim family. She also worked as a nanny, and the child she cared for attended the same preschool as Lucia. That shared space of trust became the meeting point between the two families. During one of the ballet classes, Jocelyn's sister approached Marina Crim and casually asked if she had a nanny. Marina said no. The Crims had just moved to New York, were still adjusting to their new life, and were only beginning to think about getting some extra help with the kids. They asked for a recommendation for Jocelyn, and at first glance, everything seemed almost perfect. She appeared experienced, calm, reliable, like exactly what they were looking for. Only much later would it come out that one of Jocelyn's relatives had provided a fake reference, claiming she had worked as a nanny for a child who never actually existed. But at the time, that detail was completely hidden, buried beneath a picture of trust. Marina kept a blog where she wrote in detail about the everyday life of the Crim family. She shared stories about raising young children, their activities, their walks, their small daily joys. And between the lines of those posts, it was clear that Jocelyn truly was an important part of the household, someone it was hard to imagine their daily rhythm without. Her name appeared naturally, without any hint of doubt or concern. It all felt normal, safe. In February 2012, just a few months before the murders, the Crim family traveled to the Dominican Republic for 9 days. They stayed at Jocelyn's sister's home, a gesture that, honestly, showed just how deep that trust ran. At the time, the trip seemed like a simple family visit, a warm moment in their lives. Only later would it take on a completely different, deeply unsettling meaning. "We just spent the last 9 days in the Dominican Republic," Marina Crim wrote on February 18th. "We spent about half that time at our nanny Josie's sister's home in Santiago de los Caballeros, and the rest of it at Balkan Atlantico in Las Terrenas. It's a condo-style hotel where the real housewives of the Dominican Republic and their families hang out on the weekends. It was amazing. We got to know Josie's family, and honestly, the Dominican Republic is just a truly beautiful country." Marina Crim and Kevin Crim were incredibly devoted, deeply caring parents. Their entire lives, every small, everyday decision, somehow revolved around their children. Marina's blog posts made that unmistakably clear, again and again. They practically radiated love, this deep attachment, this genuine admiration for her family. Her words were simple, but they felt real. You could feel that warmth in them, the kind you can't fake. On September 30th, Marina shared a photo of her son after his 2nd birthday. There was nothing staged or showy about it, just a normal slice of life, cozy, tender, and full of that quiet family closeness. And honestly, it was moments like that that made her blog feel so touching and alive. "One of the best parts of my day," she wrote, "is when I walk both girls to school and then I get 3 precious hours alone with little Leo Crim." Okay, I'm getting way too sentimental here. I just love this boy so much. It sounded like something any loving mum might say, you know? A woman truly enjoying every minute she gets with her child. There was nothing extraordinary about those words, and that's exactly what makes them hurt so much. It was the voice of a calm, happy life, one that hadn't yet realized just how fragile it really was.
Investigators are trying to figure out this morning what could have made a New York family's caretaker turn on the children she was paid to protect.
Pull it up! Keep going! On the floor of the bathroom is a nanny who apparently had inflicted wounds on her throat.
Herbert Klein lives next door and heard the mother screaming.
She's crying out, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? My life is ruined. I have no children. I have no children.
Police escorted Crim from the scene after dark with her only surviving child, a sheet draped over their heads. The 50-year-old nanny survived the wounds to her throat, and this morning police say she's in critical but stable condition at a nearby hospital.
The self-inflicted wound to her neck somehow missed every major artery and vein, a thing that, honestly, felt almost impossible. At first, doctors placed her in a medically induced coma, intubated her, and kept her under constant police guard. After 2 days, she came out of the coma, but she still couldn't speak. She was handcuffed to the hospital bed, and because of the nature of her injuries, she was forced to communicate in a painfully slow way, silently forming words with her lips and pointing to letters on an alphabet chart. It was a stark, unsettling scene, one that underscored just how severe and irreversible everything had already become. She wrote, "I had to do everything and take care of the kids. I was hired just as a nanny, but she wanted me to do everything. She demanded 5 hours of cleaning every single week." The words came out flat and matter of fact, written without emotion, but behind them was a clear sense of resentment that had been quietly building for a long time. Investigators had to dig much deeper into the life of Yoselin Ortega to try to understand whether there were any warning signs that might explain what led to this crime. On the surface, everything looked ordinary, but the more details came out, the more unsettling the overall picture became. A few months before the tragedy, Yoselin brought her 17-year-old son from the Dominican Republic to New York. It was a huge step for her, financially and emotionally. According to reports, she planned to enroll him in a private school, hoping to give him a better future. Her brother agreed to pay for the first year of tuition, but made it very clear that after that, all the expenses would be on her. For Yoselin, that meant constant pressure and this lingering fear that she wouldn't be able to keep up. Like, the weight of that responsibility never really left her. She had separated from her son's father back in 2001. Her ex-husband later said there had never been open conflicts or loud arguments between them. According to him, they maintained calm, civil relations as much as possible. He was stunned by what happened and couldn't find any logical explanation for it. One source told the media that he had no idea what kind of inner demons might have been living inside her all those years. Yoselin's niece also described the incident as shocking and almost impossible to comprehend. "She loved those children," she said, clearly confused. "I honestly don't know what could have made her do something like this." At the same time, she added that her aunt had seemed a little off lately. According to her, Yoselin had been acting nervous, tense, like she was constantly under some invisible pressure she never spoke about out loud. One neighbor, who had met the nanny just a few days before the tragedy, described her as extremely quiet and withdrawn. "She didn't talk to anyone and just stared straight ahead," he said, "like she was somewhere far away, not really here." Other neighbors of Yoselin Ortega in Hamilton Heights noticed changes in her behavior too. They said she had visibly lost weight and looked worn down, unhappy, anxious, jittery, almost on edge all the time. Lately, they felt something unstable about her, like she just wasn't herself anymore. She had recently returned to Hamilton Heights after losing her apartment in Bronx, and that only made her situation worse. To bring in at least some extra cash, she started selling personal items, trying, to somehow make ends meet. During questioning, Jocelyn told investigators about the serious financial problems that had been hanging over her for a long time. According to sources, she was filled with intense anger after the family asked her to take on additional household duties in exchange for more pay. For her, that crossed a line it hit at her sense of dignity. "I'm paid to take care of the children, not to clean and do housework," she told investigators. According to one media source, the day before the murders, a man named F.A.O. Cornell, who had known Jocelyn since childhood, said that she reached out to his wife and asked to be taken to see a psychologist. The wife agreed to help, which suggested that Jocelyn herself knew something was wrong, even if she couldn't fully put it into words. When the anesthesia finally wore off, Jocelyn was in a state doctors described as catatonic. She barely responded to anything around her. Over time, she began to move her eyes and slowly nod her head. According to law enforcement officials, the more she became aware of what had happened, the less willing she was to engage, and the less she wanted to speak at all. Eventually, right there in her hospital bed, she was formally charged with murder. It was the final, cold legal period in a story that had started with trust and ended in a tragedy that, honestly, still defies any rational explanation.
That Manhattan nanny who stabbed 2 children in her care has been indicted. 50-year-old Jocelyn Ortega has been indicted now with first-degree murder. She is charged with killing 6-year-old Lucia Crim and her 2-year-old brother Leo in their Manhattan apartment back on October 25th. The children's mother found them dead when she returned home from an errand with another child.
As this story kept resurfacing in headlines around the world, the public just couldn't wrap their heads around the scale and brutality of what had happened. People weren't only shocked by the crime itself, but by who committed it. The realization that violence this extreme was carried out by someone who had been fully trusted with the most precious thing imaginable hit hard. It triggered this deep, collective shock, a tragedy that shattered assumptions about safety, trust, and control, even in places that seem quiet, cozy, and protected. The grief that all of us feel for Kevin Crim, Marina Crim, and their family is immeasurable, said Mark Hoffman, the president and chief executive officer of CNBC, where Kevin worked. There are simply no words that can truly express the magnitude of this tragedy. His statement reflected not just the company's official position, but the shared confusion and pain felt by co-workers, friends, and everyone following the case. Kevin and Marina's parents, along with their siblings who lived on the West Coast, immediately flew to New York to be close and offer whatever support they could. They arrived in a city that had so recently symbolized a fresh chapter and now had become the site of overwhelming loss. Kevin's father said, with visible pain, that the family never returned to that apartment. "I don't know if they'll ever go back there," he said. "I don't know if they even can." The doubt and fear in his words were unmistakable. Kevin told those close to him that he was doing everything he could to stay strong, not for himself, but for his wife and their only surviving daughter. He was holding on for them. His father later shared words that captured his son's emotional state perfectly. "Our son texted our daughters and said, 'You can't talk to mum and dad right now because he would just completely fall apart.'" It was a raw admission from someone standing right at the edge of emotional collapse, yet still forcing himself to stand, even when there was almost nothing left to give. "This is the worst nightmare anyone could ever imagine," said the children's grandmother, Karen Crim. "We have no idea what actually triggered this." Her words echoed the broader disbelief, how a series of seemingly small, ordinary circumstances could somehow spiral into such a catastrophic ending. Facing 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder, Jocelyn Ortega pleaded not guilty, claiming she was not criminally responsible. That stance immediately became the central issue of the upcoming trial. Prosecutors strongly disagreed. They argued that Jocelyn fully understood her actions and acted deliberately and with extreme cruelty, killing 2 children who were under her direct care. According to the prosecution, the motive stemmed from deep personal resentment toward Marina. They also emphasized that there was no convincing evidence of a severe mental illness or defect that could explain her state at the time of the crime. At the first court hearing, defense attorneys said they needed more time to go through roughly 6,000 pages of medical records. That material was expected to be a key factor in determining whether Jocelyn Ortega was even competent to stand trial and participate in the proceedings. At that point, she was being held without bail in a psychiatric ward within Elmhurst Hospital Center. this isolated space that sat somewhere between medicine and the justice system. You know, not quite one or the other. A memorial service for the children was held at Avery Fisher Hall in Manhattan. The vast hall filled with a silence that felt heavier than any words ever could. After the ceremony, the couple released a statement. "We want to thank you for the incredible outpouring of love and kindness," they wrote. "Lulu and Leo were two of our 3 best friends, and we miss them beyond measure. Our daughter Nessie is very strong, and with your support, we will be strong for her." Earlier this week, we gathered with family and friends to honor the beautiful lives of Lulu and Leo. It is important to us that they be remembered as the sweet, creative, and joyful children they truly were. We are honoring our children by creating the Lulu and Leo Fund. This fund will support access to arts and science education for young children in schools, museums, and other community institutions. Art classes gave Lulu some of the happiest and most enriching moments of her life. We want to help other children have access to those same incredible opportunities. Then, in October 2013, like a small but powerful ray of light breaking through the darkness, the couple welcomed a son, Felix Crim. "Fall is an emotional time of year for us," the family wrote on Facebook. "We carry some very heavy dates with us, the anniversary of Leo Crim's birthday and the day Lucia Crim and Leo died. At the same time, we also have truly wonderful news. Marina Crim is pregnant with a baby boy, who is expected to arrive toward the end of January. Nessie Crim is loving her role as the new queen of the family, and little Felix Crim, who turns 1 this weekend, is absolutely thrilled to give up his crib and move in with Nessie into a new bunk bed. With every new child, we feel a special, even closer connection to Lulu and Leo. They are constantly present in the looks, the gestures, and the voices of their brothers and sisters. Later on, Marina gave birth to another baby boy, named Jonas Crim. Eventually, Jocelyn Ortega was ruled competent to stand trial. Forensic psychiatric evaluations concluded that she understood the nature of the court proceedings, grasped the charges against her, and was capable of assisting in her own defense. That ruling marked a major turning point in a case that had spent years hovering between criminal law and questions of mental health. After long evaluations and close observation, Jocelyn appeared before Gregory Caro, and the case finally began to move forward. "If you don't feel any emotion during this trial," the judge told potential jurors during jury selection, "you might want to check your pulse." That line instantly set the tone for everything that followed. It was a clear warning that the case they were about to hear would leave no one untouched. The judge was basically saying, "Look, what's coming will be hard to sit with, even for people who deal with violent crime all the time." Jocelyn rejected a plea deal that would have given her 30 years in prison, with the possibility of life in exchange for pleading guilty to 2 counts of murder. Turning that down meant she was willing to take the risk and go all the way to a full trial, standing firm on her position. It also meant opening herself up to a much harsher sentence if she lost. At the same time, it gave her the chance to fight, using a defense centered on her mental state. The years leading up to trial were spent almost entirely on pre-trial hearings, focused on one key issue, her criminal responsibility. Every hearing, every expert opinion, every document added another layer to an already complicated and deeply controversial picture. In New York, the legal threshold for an insanity defense is extremely high, and cases like this rarely succeed. The law doesn't just require proof of mental illness. It demands clear evidence that, at the exact moment of the crime, the defendant did not understand that what they were doing was wrong and could not comprehend the consequences of their actions. That's exactly what Jocelyn's defense team tried to prove. They argued that her mental state was so severely impaired that she had lost control and could no longer accurately process reality. Prosecutors flatly rejected that claim. They insisted her actions were deliberate, methodical, and showed full awareness of what she was doing. That clash became the core of the trial, a battle between the idea of total mental collapse and the prosecution's argument that this was a cold, intentional act of violence.
Trial against a nanny accused of killing 2 young children in her care got underway today in Lower Manhattan. Prosecutors say in 2012, Jocelyn Ortega stabbed a 6-year-old girl and her 2-year-old brother inside their family's Upper West Side apartment. CBS 2's Hazel Sanchez has more now from the courthouse.
Nanny Jocelyn Ortega sat emotionless as prosecutors detailed the unthinkable murders of the two beautiful children who were under her care.
Marina Crim opened the bathroom door and saw the bloodied, lifeless bodies of her 6-year-old daughter and 2-year-old son stacked in the bathtub, their eyes open, covered in blood, staring ahead. And between her and her dead babies was the defendant, the person responsible for this atrocity, standing, holding one of the knives that she had used to kill those babies. These are the undisputed facts in this case. And these are the facts and the evidence that will prove to you, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant intentionally murdered Lulu and Leo Crim on October 25th, 2012. That she knew what she was doing when she killed them, and that she knew that killing them was wrong.
I will ask that you determine whether or not my client had an ability to understand and perceive and confront her illness on October 25th, 12. I will ask you to determine whether she had the prerequisite mental state.
Objection as to the summation entirely.
Respectfully accept. The insanity defense to be proffered by Jocelyn Ortega is deeply rooted in the cultural and legal traditions of our democratic society. While on the one hand there is legitimate need to hold and punish criminal defendants who are accountable and responsible pursuant to our laws for their actions, there is also the law.
Well, I'm going to instruct you on the law. It's what I instruct you on. You must follow. Okay? Go ahead.
I will argue and the defense will show.
Objection as to I will argue.
I will prove and the defense will show that it is wrong, and a wrong has been committed here, an intentional wrong. If a person is capable of that intent, was she capable of forming an intent to kill on October 25th, 12? That is the question here. And I will ask you to determine at the end of this case whether or not these acts were driven by my client's acute psychotic state. My client's, Judge, this is what I...
Overruled. Go ahead.
Whether or not these acts that are set out on People's Direct were driven by my client's acute psychotic state. Were they driven by her delusions, her hallucinations, her dissociation, and her severe depression? Or were they intentional?
Jocelyn Ortega viciously and violently slaughtered Lucia Crim and Leo Crim on October 25th, 2012. Intentionally and deliberately.
According to the defense, 55-year-old Ortega is not responsible for murder. She, too, is a victim of mental illness never treated.
The evidence will show that she has a corroborated history of hearing voices and dissociating from reality since the age of 16.
Now, the defense says Ortega had no motive to kill the children, a hallmark of insanity. The prosecution, however, says her actions were deliberate, an attempt to get even with the Crims for trying to make her work hard.
According to investigators, Jocelyn Ortega took 2 knives from the kitchen before the attack even began. This wasn't impulsive. Grove emphasized that Lucia Crim understood what was happening around her. The 30 separate stab and slash wounds, she said, clearly indicated that Lucia was fighting back, struggling for her life in her final moments. The injuries were so severe, so extensive, that first responders initially feared to have told the jury. The prosecution was clear. Jocelyn's actions were not chaotic or out of control. Quite the opposite. They appeared deliberate, sequential, and coldly calculated. Addressing Jocelyn's visit to a psychologist shortly before the killings, prosecutors pointed out that it was her only contact with a mental health professional in roughly 30 years. During that session, she complained of intense anxiety, constant stress, and a deep sense of personal failure. But according to the prosecution, those complaints did not come close to proving a break from reality or a total loss of self-control. The therapist she met with, Thomas Caffrey, testified in court. He said Jocelyn spoke about guilt, anxiety, and depressive feelings. At the same time, he made it clear that she did not appear to be someone planning to harm herself or anyone else. During the session, He observed no signs of hallucinations, delusions, or psychotic episodes. Her speech was coherent. Her behavior appeared controlled on the surface. One of the most critical and emotionally devastating witnesses for the prosecution was Marina Crim. Her taking the stand marks the moment when clinical language and expert analysis collided with lived reality. This was no longer just evidence or testimony. This was the voice of a mother, and for her, these events would never be just lines in a legal record.
Marina Crim didn't wait to be asked any questions, but voice trembling, her body shaking, burst aloud in the courtroom, calling Yoselin Ortega liar.
It's like a total horror movie. I walk down the hall and I see the light on under the door, she said. I see Lulu. I knew that she was dead. She's lying in the bathtub and her eyes are open. I see Leo next to her. They had blood on them. Then I see the defendant, blood all over her and eyes bugging out. All I remember saying to her is, "I hate you." Prosecutors say Lulu tried desperately to defend herself.
She knew what was happening, she understood what the defendant was doing, and she fought to live. And the defendant repaid Lulu's resistance with almost 30 different stab and slash wounds to her body and her neck.
The devastated mother says, quote, "She killed my best friends." And when leaving the courtroom, Crim turned to Ortega and said, "You're gross. You're disgusting."
A defense attorney asked Crim about talking to police after the murders. Crim grew upset and yelled, "I don't remember what I said that day. I was grieving in a massive way." Crim testified a few weeks before the murders, she saw the nanny, quote, "looking at me with this glare on her face that was just pure evil, a really weird, mean look."
We saw jurors in tears as they left the courtroom after hearing Marina Crim's heartbreaking testimony. The defendant, Yoselin Ortega, remained emotionless throughout the entire hearing.
From emotional to angry, it was day 2 of testimony in the case of the Upper West Side nanny charged with killing 2 children in her care. Today, defiant mother Marina Crim was back on the stand. At times, she directly addressed her former nanny, Yoselin Ortega, and called her evil. Eyewitness News reporter Rob Nelson has the story.
After finishing 2 days of gut-wrenching testimony, Marina Crim again lashed out at the accused killer of her 2 children today, shouting, "You're evil, you're evil, please get me out of here," as she left the courtroom in a fit of anger and grief.
For the jurors, simply sitting in that courtroom and listening to the detailed descriptions of what happened to the children was almost unbearable. And then came the photographs from the crime scene, graphic images that showed the aftermath of violence with no filter at all. It's hard to even imagine the psychological weight that placed on people who were expected to stay composed, focused, and impartial. One juror began visibly shaking after hearing the detailed descriptions of the children's injuries. Another reached a breaking point and asked to be removed from the jury entirely, openly admitting that after what he had seen, he could no longer be fair or objective. While those images were shown, Yoselin Ortega refused to look at the screen. She sat there staring straight ahead, like she was trying to shut everything out. Throughout the trial, her behavior repeatedly raised eyebrows and fueled concern. At times, she laughed at moments that made no sense, including while a retired police officer testified about his interactions with her after the killings. At other moments, she slowly shook her head or rolled her eyes, as if she disagreed with what was being said or was mentally somewhere else entirely. Defense attorneys claimed that Yoselin had suffered from psychotic episodes and hallucinations since a young age. According to them, instead of seeking professional medical help, she leaned on religion, faith, prayer, believing that was the only way she could cope. After the murders, the defense said, she told a psychiatrist that she felt as if the devil had entered her body, and that she heard voices ordering her to kill. Mental illness doesn't announce itself like a bad cough or a limp, the defense attorney told the jury. Sometimes it sneaks in quietly and lives inside a person for a long time before anyone notices. Prosecutors strongly rejected that narrative. They argued that her behavior on the day of the murders actually showed awareness and control. They pointed out that Yoselin left her phone at home and hung several important documents on the apartment door handle, almost like she was putting things in order before carrying out a plan. To the prosecution, that looked like a clear, intentional sequence of actions. Her plan that day was to kill the Crim children and then take her own life, prosecutors stated bluntly. Yoselin's son also testified in court, and his words landed especially hard. He referred to the killings as an accident. "I'm sorry, did you just say an accident?" the prosecutor asked, clearly taken aback. "Unfortunately, 2 children died," he replied, repeating the phrase and leaving the courtroom suspended in a tense, almost stunned silence. Although some people claim that, before the tragedy, Yoselin Ortega seemed almost possessed and behaved strangely, her son said he never saw that side of his mother. At the same time, he admitted that on that day, she looked sad and withdrawn. Still, according to him, she acted completely normally. She kissed him goodbye and waved as he headed to school, just like she had done so many times before. He also testified that on the night of the murders, he received a phone call from his mother's number. When he answered, he heard a man's voice that said only one thing, "I need help," and then the line went dead. Her phone was left at home, but it was never recovered. The phone line was disconnected shortly after the killings, which became yet another unanswered question for investigators. Even though no clear motive was ever definitively established, the prosecutor suggested the cause may have been a complex mix of deep jealousy toward Marina Crim and severe financial stress. Yoselin couldn't afford private school for her son, had lost her apartment, and was forced to move back in with her sister. All of that pressure could have been building for years. At the same time, the prosecution openly acknowledged that the theory of jealousy and money was just that, a theory, not a proven fact. "You may feel like you never received a satisfying answer," the prosecutor told the jury, "but that's because there is no satisfying answer. Not knowing why the defendants stabbed Lucia and Leo Crim does not mean she is not responsible for her actions or for these murders. It simply means there is no good explanation." Kevin Crim also took the stand. As he walked to the witness box, the courtroom fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. His testimony, especially when he described the last time he said goodbye to his children, became too much for many jurors. People wiped away tears openly, unable to hide their emotions. This was no longer just evidence or testimony. It was raw, irreversible loss, impossible to see as anything abstract. "I knelt down, kissed them, and said goodbye." Those words hung in the air not as part of a case file, but as the final memory of a father saying goodbye to his children.
With a look of disgust on his face, Kevin Crim sat on a courtroom bench just a few yards away from Yoselin Ortega, the woman he once trusted to care for his children. Her attorney says the 55-year-old suffers from severe psychosis and depression and heard voices telling her to kill the kids. But a video shown during the trial contradicts the defense claim, as Ortega is heard saying she never heard or saw Satan.
Do you remember at all talking to him about that you felt that you being possessed by devil? The devil was taking control of your body?
No. Prosecutors claim Ortega acted out of anger against the Crims, particularly the children's mother, Marina Crim, for allegedly overworking her. Marina Crim was not in court today. The jurors are expected to begin deliberating tomorrow. In Lower Manhattan, Hazel Sanchez, CBS 2 News.
The trial itself lasted 2 full months, and the level of public and media attention was absolutely massive. People everywhere were watching, following every detail, trying to make sense of something that still felt unreal. When the jury finally retired to deliberate, it was like the entire room, honestly, the entire city was holding its breath. Just 2 days later, the verdict was announced.
A jury today convicted a nanny of murder in the brutal stabbing of 2 young children in her care.
Yoselin Ortega was found guilty of killing 6-year-old Lulu Crim and her 2-year-old brother Leo.
Are the defendant guilty, not guilty, or not responsible by reason of mental disease or defect?
Yoselin Ortega sat nearly still as 4 guilty verdicts were read, only moving once to wipe a tear from her cheek.
Yoselin Ortega was found guilty on all counts, 2 counts of second-degree murder and 2 counts of first-degree murder. After 2 months of testimony and just 2 days of deliberation, that was the jury's final decision.
The victim's father, Kevin Crim, listened from the front row with alternate jurors who had already been dismissed but came back to hear the verdict.
The impact this case had on the jurors was impossible to miss. You could see it in their faces, in their body language, like the weight of everything they had heard didn't just stay in the courtroom, it followed them, heavy and unmistakable, long after the verdict was read.
We were divided at the beginning, and we were divided
until the moment we made the decision.
I think I can speak on behalf of everybody. I say we feel great in the decision that we rendered.
This was a very difficult decision for all of us. While the basic facts were very clear from the beginning, we also wanted to be sure that we were giving everybody a fair opportunity. It was not a decision we reached lightly or easily. There were some raised voices and a lot of tears. But I think we all feel good that we addressed all of the issues and fairly weighed everything that was presented to us.
After the guilty verdict was read, Kevin Crim shared a message on Facebook, saying that he hugged as many of the jurors as he could. He told them they had gone through hell, having to sit there and absorb everything during that trial. This journey has been incredibly hard for us, Kevin Crim wrote, but at the same time, it reaffirmed our love for New York, the city that Lucia Crim and Leo Crim loved so deeply. And then, the moment arrived. It was time for sentencing, time for the court to decide the fate of Yoselin Ortega.
Just a few words, Your Honor. This defendant murdered 2 innocent children. She did it intentionally. She did it with the full knowledge of the consequences of her actions. Now is the time for justice. Justice for Lulu, justice for Leo, justice for Marina, Kevin, and Nessie, justice for the people of the state of New York, justice for all of the people who are part of the Crim's life, who love the Crim family and love their children. And it's time for justice to be meted out for horrific acts of violence that this defendant inflicted upon those children and upon the parents and the family. Nobody saw signs of a serious mental illness because there was no serious mental illness. That's what the jury found in rejecting her defense, and that's the way that she should be sentenced.
During the sentencing hearing, Kevin Crim described Yoselin Ortega as evil, extremely dangerous, a narcissist, and a complete failure as a human being. Speaking directly to the judge, he said, "I understand that you probably don't need to hear this request from Lulu and Leo's dad, especially after everything you've already heard and seen, but I need to say it anyway. When you make your sentencing decision, please follow the law, the way you always do, and make sure that the defendant never leaves prison alive. She knows nothing about responsibility or remorse, and she should know nothing about hope." The words landed heavy in the courtroom, not as anger alone, but as the voice of a father who had lost everything and was asking for the only kind of justice.
In my best moments, I feel Lulu and Leo inspiring me and carrying me forward. In my most difficult moments, I try to ask myself what Lulu and Leo would choose to do. It's the best beacon of hope, the best guidance most of us could ever hope to have. Thank you. Thank you.
Marina Crim also addressed the court during the sentencing hearing. Her voice carried the weight of everything that had been lost as she stood there to speak not just as a witness, but as a mother whose life... Using a translator and speaking in Spanish, Yoselin Ortega addressed the court and said, and place her in protective custody, with access to mental health specialists and medical care. "I understand that my client took the lives of 2 priceless children," he said. "I beg you not to take her life as well, by sentencing her to prison with no hope of parole." The court did not agree. Gregory Caro called her actions pure evil and thanked the jury for rejecting the insanity defense. "Your planning and forethought, including your intention to take your own life that day, were undeniable," the judge said. "The only thing that remains unclear, and it remains unclear largely because you claim not to remember, is why you chose to take the lives of these children." It was a final, devastating statement, drawing a hard line between mercy and accountability, and making it clear that, in the eyes of the court, what happened could never be excused.
Just moments ago, the sentence came down, and Yoselin Ortega will spend the rest of her life behind bars.
The court sentenced Yoselin Ortega to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
The parents are channeling their pain into a new initiative named for their children, advocating for legislation that makes falsifying references on job applications for caregivers a crime.
In an effort to reduce the risk of anything like this ever happening again, the family chose to do the very little that was still possible after an irreversible loss. They tried to find meaning through action, in a place where meaning almost doesn't exist anymore. The family announced their support for legislation that would make it a crime to apply for caregiving jobs using false references or fabricated qualifications. The idea was simple but fundamental. Trust in those who care for children cannot be built on lies, especially when the safety of the most vulnerable is at stake. We were deceived and betrayed by the defendants' relatives, who to this day have faced no accountability for their role in the deaths of our children, the family said. Every child deserves an honest, responsible caregiver, and no one should believe they can lie when it comes to the care and safety of our kids. There was no hatred in those words, just painful truth and a firm determination to make sure what happened to their family never happens to another. Finding the right words to bring a case like this to a close is incredibly hard. The violence and horror that filled that apartment in October 2012 exist beyond normal human understanding. It's the kind of thing most people couldn't imagine even in their worst nightmares, let alone accept as reality. This story leaves behind an emptiness and questions that will never have answers. Turning something so unspeakably tragic into something as bright, hopeful, and positive as the Lulu and Leo Fund feels almost impossible. And yet, Marina Crim and Kevin Crim found the strength to do exactly that. There was no performance in their actions, just a desire to make sure their children are remembered not only through horror, but through efforts that might protect other children. The dignity, inner strength, and quiet grace they showed after such an unimaginable loss are rare. It's a powerful reminder that even after total devastation, it's still possible to remain human. Their story, painful, unfair, and terrifying, also stands as proof that compassion, responsibility, and humanity can survive even after the darkest night. Thank you to everyone who watched this video. We hope this story mattered to you. If you'd like to support the channel and help us keep creating content, please like the video, leave a comment, share it, and subscribe. Your support truly means a lot, and we sincerely appreciate everyone who helps keep these stories from being forgotten.